With Loki being pruned and waking up in a strange place, will he be able to reunite with Sylvie? And does that mean that Mobius is also alive? Last week's episode was one hell of a ride and left us with so many open questions. Hi there, it's Micha. Come in and let's find out together which one of those are getting answered. On this video I will focus more on the review aspects and maybe give you some Easter eggs here and there, while the plan is to discuss most of the theories in the next video with my sister Angie. Although that one might get a little bit shorter than usual because at the end of the episode there were only a few things one could theorize about. But that should not be a bad thing, right? So let's jump right into the synopsis. Loki finds himself at the end of time in a place called the Void, where a cloud-like monster called Alligator is eating up all matter and energy that is being dumped there, which happens every time someone is pruned or a timeline is resetted. But more on that later. Our variant is teaming up with some of the nicer Lokis that are kicking around in that place, with the ultimate plan being to kill Alligator, because without the monster, people might be actually able to live in that place. Meanwhile, Sylvie learns from Ravonna that everyone who gets pruned is still alive. Ravonna even suggested to join forces so that they can find out who is behind it all. But ultimately Ravonna was only stalling for time, ending up in Sylvie's self-pruning to bring herself to the place where Loki and all the other pruned people were transported to. There, while running away from Alligator, she touches the cloud for a split second and sees the flash of a consciousness. A few seconds later, Mobius shows up in a pizza delivery car and rescues her. But Sylvie feels that she might be able to enchant the cloud, as it seems to be a living thing, and asks Mobius to head toward Alligator, the same way that Loki is heading. There the two reunite and plan to enchant Alligator together. They hand the tempad to Mobius, who asks the remaining Loki variants if they want to have a ticket out of here. But they decide to stay, because this had become their home. Mobius then leaves, heading towards the TVA to burn it to the ground. Loki and Sylvie head towards the cloud monster, and after some smaller issues, they actually manage to enchant it, which opens up a passage to the creature that is behind it all. But what that means, we will find out in the next episode. After an exceptionally good episode last week, this week again delivered on almost the same level. We have a very solid continuation of everything that happened last week, resolving most of our questions, even though most theories we had were completely wrong again. But everything they explained made sense, so it was great and, at the same time, surprising. My favorite moments in this episode were the following. The first one was as the president variant of Loki was dissing the alligator, and yes, it was an alligator, so Angie was right. Dissing the alligator and then screaming as it bit off his hand, which was a hilarious high-pitched bitchy cry, which was warranted by the situation but still funny as hell. The second moment I really enjoyed was Mobius talking and apologizing to Sylvie, which is for me closing the gap from him being completely behind the TVA to saying hey, let's burn it all down. Basically we see the emotional transition from that point to the other, which I was missing in last week's episode. Sticking with Mobius, of course, the third great moment this episode was Mobius hugging Loki, saying, "You are my favorite," which Loki thought Mobius was telling him, but all the while Mobius was looking at Sylvie while saying that, showing that he also can be some kind of a sneaky bastard. The fourth great moment, of course, was when Sylvie met up with Loki asking him what his plan was, and he says he's trying to kill Alligator, where she just says, "God, that was your plan?" Looking at the others questioningly asking, "And you were going along with that?" And they all like, "Well, we had our doubts as well," which was hilarious. The fifth moment is one of the big emotional scenes this episode. First we see the old Loki deciding to help the guys distract Elias so that Sylvie doesn't get consumed. He does that by casting a projection of the whole city of Asgard from scratch. Something that impressed Sylvie so much, asking, how is he doing this? to which Loki just replies, "I think we might be stronger than we realize." This whole situation leads into old Loki dying the death of a hero, with the monster consuming him while he is calling out from the top of his lungs, "Glorious purpose!" Then again, maybe he survived and we only saw a projection of him that he convincingly cast. But since we saw his smoldering helmet falling to the ground, I assume he really got the hero's death that we saw. Next up, of course, was the longer scene between Loki and Sylvie, where they just talked before heading into battle. They were talking about relations, about friendships, and in a very emotional scene, Sylvie was hesitantly asking, "How do I know that you don't betray me at the last moment?" Where he reiterates that he has changed, which he ultimately proved by sticking with her, even as he had the chance of getting out. And he actually never betrayed her, even when facing almost certain death. They even make plans for the future, whatever that might mean. Even as it was ambiguous in the last episode, I think it's pretty clear now that they are starting to be romantically entangled. However that might work in the end, but we will see. Hopefully. The last moment that I really enjoyed was actually the last scene where they realized that one Loki alone is not strong enough to enchant the monster, and it takes two of them working together, being a team. And I guess that is building on the thing that created the branches before when they held hands. Because as we saw in this episode, Lokis never worked together, and they did. They really fought their own natures, trusting each other and coming through, which was great to see. The only smaller issue I had with this episode was that the reveal of Mobius being alive and the scene where the three of them meet up together could have had a little bit more of an emotional impact to me than it had. They could have filmed it with a little bit more of an emotional payoff. Again, it was a great episode, and so far this series did not disappoint us. It was a strong episode, and I felt it was really slightly inferior to the one last week. So I'm rating this one with 9 out of 10 points, hoping that the next episode might be reaching a 10 if they don't botch it. And to be honest, the only way I could think of that they could botch the end of a show would be letting either Loki or Sylvie permanently die. And I hope they won't do that, but I'm also a little afraid that they might. But we will find out in next week's episode. Let's continue with some quick observations and some Easter eggs. First off, the Void. I think they really did a great job explaining where everyone who was pruned is ending up. It was not, as I thought, right behind an apocalypse where nothing else would even matter. It was at the end of time, which technically is behind an apocalypse, but that is of course not what I meant when I said that. Which was a really sneaky thing, because the end of time is being written as it happens. So everything that happens cannot, by definition, be a deviation from the timeline, and everything that happens there cannot create a Nexus event, so they are completely hidden there. They also pretty clearly said that they cannot actually erase a timeline, because that would be too much of an effort. They can just transfer it, redirect it, and they do so by basically dumping everything that needed to be removed from one timeline to that void. Where they also planted a monster, this Alligator, a smoke monster, cloud-like tempest thing that is consuming matter and energy, which solves the issue of overcrowding this place with either people or other matter, because the beast is just eating it all up. And only the strongest and most sneakiest creatures can survive there. And that is of course why most of the creatures that are being alive there are Loki variants. Because Lokis are survivors, which added a nice touch to it all. The standoff between Sylvie and Renslayer was also nicely resolved, as Ravonna was offering her cooperation because she also wanted to know who is behind it all. But Sylvie quickly looks right through her, understanding that she is not really interested in cooperating, but is just stalling for time. Something where, curiously, Miss Minute is very helpful in helping Ravonna to do so. As Sylvie is cornered by Minutemen, Renslayer offers her to put her in a time cell, where she put her in a time loop, and to be nice, just repeating a good memory she had. To which she answers, "I only really have one," obviously referring to the connection she had with Loki. This revelation and facing only two different outcomes, either giving up and being captured, or trusting that at least the information she received about pruning is correct, and that if she self-prunes, she will land at the same place that Loki is located, she is betting all on one card and prunes herself. This of course means that the motivation of Renslayer is still ambiguous, and we still don't know what she knew and what her intentions are. She does not seem to know who is behind it all, but for sure she knew that pruning doesn't mean the ultimate death. But that is just something that might have come with her status as being a judge. Her not knowing is also reiterated by her talking to Hunter B15, who said, "You will never find the person behind it all before Sylvie does. Because you just want it, but she needs to do it." Which was also a nice sentiment. There were also some rumors in the internet that Miss Minute might be more than we think of her, but at least in this episode it still remains unclear. She just seems to be an in-between, an interface between the employees and the TVA database. But she still could be more. I mean, like I said before, she helped Ravonna stall for time, so there might be more to her than we think. But one interesting thing I noticed is that at the end of the conversation between Renslayer and Miss Minute, Ravonna asks for all the files on the creation of the Timekeepers. Something that she tried to ask from Miss Minute, now that I remember it, even when she was faking the cooperation with Sylvie. Even though at that moment she should have been more interested in the end of time, where the void is located. So that gave me the idea if she is just there herself being undercover. Maybe her mission is to get up the ranks of the TVA to find out who is behind it all. And the reason why I think that is because there was that dirty smirk again at the end of that scene, where she looked as evil as can be. So she might still be working with someone else who wants to take over the whole bureau, and she is just trying to do it from within, like Loki originally planned to do. Which is also still a theory that maybe the person behind it all is a Loki variant. Again, we will for sure find out next week in the final episode. Another very interesting development was getting to know a little bit more about the other Loki variants that we saw at the end of last week's episode. In the serious talk video with my sister, we were speculating that maybe they are the good ones, the good variants that were all put into that place. But as we saw, there were also a lot of asshole variants of Loki there as well, like President Loki. I was especially surprised and also a little bit disappointed that the Loki variant with his version of Mjolnir was also just an imposter. He was even lying to the other variants about his backstory, boasting that he had killed Iron Man and Captain America and then gained all the 6 Infinity Stones. Right. Nobody believed that. And as it turned out, he was also the one who betrayed his other comrades just to further his own agenda. Because Kid Loki, who was not as we expected the version that might be joining the Young Avengers eventually, that teenage variant of Loki named his Nexus event as Killing Thor. And after he was pruned and landing in this place, he became the ruler of it. So he is currently the King of the Void. Which was the reason the other Loki betrayed him, because he wanted to become king. But his alliance with President Loki and his team ended in him also being betrayed by that Loki, because he promised him the crown, which he then wanted to keep for himself.
Come on, what did you expect?
But of course then his army of Lokis also turned against him again, which just showed that Lokis usually cannot cooperate and Lokis cannot be trusted. They cannot even trust themselves. Which again drives the point home that Sylvie and Loki connecting and trusting each other is such an extraordinary thing. But also the other 2 Lokis that remain, and I'm not counting the alligator variant because he is a nice sidekick, but we don't really know what's going on with him, because as Mobius later says, we cannot even be sure that he actually is a Loki variant. But he also mentioned that maybe he is playing a long con, which would more likely make him a Loki variant. So it is unclear at that point. I still think it is more funny to think of him as a Loki variant, so that's what I like to do. But let's get to the point that I wanted to make before. The 2 Lokis that are remaining, Old Loki and Kid Loki, are the only variants in the whole bunch that learned something from their lives. Those 2 were the only ones who actually regretted being deceitful all the time. Especially the old variant, who said that it is so stupid to just pursue this glorious power, not glorious purpose, he used the word power, to drive every decision, betraying everyone else on the way. because he knows the outcome, and he just saw the outcome in form of a big brawl, where every variant of Loki was trying to beat up and kill all the other ones. The Kid Loki variant also says something like, and everyone who tries to better himself is being sent here. So that made me think a little bit that maybe killing Thor was not actually the Nexus event, but then trying to repent for it. But I guess we will not know, because we will likely never see that variant again. One last call out to those Loki variants, as the alligator version was shown first being held by Kid Loki. I guess that was a little bit of a precursor and a little bit of foreshadowing that those two are the only ones who come out of it alive after Old Man Loki has sacrificed himself for the greater good, which, as mentioned before, was one fantastic scene. But talking about Old Man Loki, his backstory might have been the most interesting of all. This Loki is basically exactly the same Loki we know from Avengers Infinity War, but instead of trying to kill Thanos, he just cast a projection of him that was so realistic that even Thanos was fooled. And then he hid himself in the debris, drifting through space, and eventually recluded himself on a small planet where he decided this is the only way to get away from all the pain that he has to feel, because he never really is connected to other people, and if he tried to change, he is destined to die. He realized that from a timekeeper's perspective and in the greater scheme of things, he has only one role to play, and that is being the god of outcasts. That's the reason why he hid there and grew old. And he was only removed by the TVA after he decided to get back into the game to find out how Thor is doing, if Thor has missed him, because he was just feeling so alone. And that was when he was removed from the timeline. So basically, this is something that our Loki in Infinity War could have also done. Maybe he did, and maybe that is exactly that variant, and we might find out later. But honestly, I think that our Loki really died, really was the hero that we saw in Infinity War. Because otherwise, building up this variant of Loki that we followed in this series wouldn't make sense. And only if he survives and returns to our timeline, then it only really all makes sense. And that is why I hope that they keep him and also Sylvie alive. Because otherwise it would have been all for nothing. And I guess at this point in the show, I didn't even need to be an oracle to predict that this will be the outcome of the show. That he will be back on the timeline, replacing the Loki we lost. And after all he went through, and after the adventures in which we joined him, I really believe it's the right thing to do. Because we shall not forget that this is actually the same Loki. It's the Loki from the same timeline, just taken off the timeline a little bit earlier, giving him the emotional journey the other version had in a compact and very compressed matter of time within this series. And that's why it makes sense that there can be a second season, because the series is not called Loki and the TVA, it's called Loki. So this Loki can be reintegrated into the MCU and everything is fine, everything is working. We can even see him in future movies, while the series could just concentrate on another adventure he has. While at the beginning I was worried that if the TVA is a mainstay, that the first season might end with him dying and the second season just brings in another variant, which would be a terrible concept. At least that's what I feel from an emotional standpoint. That would be very, very cruel to the viewers. So that's the big prediction. We will have a happy end in this season, and the second season would be just another standalone adventure. And I promised some Easter eggs, so let's close this video with 2 Easter eggs for you. First one is the warship that was dropped onto the planet, which is called the USS Eldridge. Have you noticed that one? For everyone who grew up in the 80s, I guess this is a reference that you might have noticed. For everyone else, here's the explanation what that means. So in the 1940s, there was an actual experiment that was conducted by the US military where they tried to create a stealth technology that makes ships virtually impossible to see by radar. And the legend says that the ship actually vanished for a few seconds. And when it showed up, the whole crew was dead, and some of them were even fused to the ship, like stuck in walls, halfway through the ground and stuff like that. This whole story was even captured in several movies, the most popular being the 1984 version called The Philadelphia Experiment. If you'd like to know more on that stuff, just read up on The Philadelphia Experiment, not just the movie, but also the actual event, and then decide what you believe actually happened there. It was a nice nod to just have that ship show up there as an in-joke, trying to provide some kind of explanation, even if it doesn't really make sense. It was just a nice nod. And if you kept your eyes open, you might have seen some other stuff going on in the background, like something that looked like a giant spaceship in the form of Captain America's shield. Also, you saw the wreck of a chopper where someone sprayed Thanos on. So maybe a Thanos variant is also ramping around there? There was likely much more stuff that I also missed, but this is an episode that you might want to rewatch just to look out for those little Easter eggs. The second Easter egg, of course, is Throg, Frog Thor, that I also mentioned in the last video with my sister Angie. Because in this episode, he actually had a quick cameo, as the internet expected. Have you caught it? Because if you had just blinked for a second, you might have missed it. It happened at the moment where they all climbed down into the bunker that the Loki variants are using as their home. When they climb down, you see a camera shot that very much copies the way that the Simpsons do it all the time, when they just pan down and show what stuff is buried between the house and something beneath it. And what you saw was that there is an actual version of Mjolnir buried right below, and also a glass jar where a frog variant of Thor was located, which was labeled T365, which of course, like in most occasions, is a hint to the comics, because Throg, the frog variant of Thor, first appeared in comic book number 365 of Thor. Okay, even though I skipped over discussing possible theories, this video actually grew longer than I thought. But that's it for now. Let me know if you agree with my rating and what you think about those Easter eggs. And let me know in the comments what your rating would have been and what Easter eggs I might have missed. As always, if you like this video, like it and feel free to share it with your friends. And why not subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any future video. Make sure to also hit the notification bell so you get a heads up whenever a new video is posted. So much for now, hear you next time and thanks for listening!